Good morning, students. Today we will be discussing about animal adaptations. Myself, BALRAM SAIN, Assistant Professor in Zoology, Government Dungar College, Bikaner. In today's lecture, we will be discussing about the adaptation and its definition, adaptation theory, types of adaptation, importance of adaptation. Now coming to the adaptation. Adaptation is the changes in the organism by which it suits best in the environment and leaves behind offsprings is known as adaptation. Had there been no adaptation, evolution would have been impossible. The earth and all the earthly things are under constant change. If we define adaptation, adaptation is the physical or behavioral characteristic of an organism that helps an organism to survive better in the surrounding environment. Or we can say it is the capability of an organism to change itself with the changing world to determine its survival. Greater the degree of adaptation, higher is the ability to exploit the environmental, resulting in the production of offsprings and consequent higher chances of survival of the species. Living things are adapted to the habitat they live in. This is because they have special features that helps them to survive. The development of these special features is the result of evolution due to gene mutation. These mutations aid in survival and reproduction and pass on from one generation to the other. Next is the adaptation theory. Adaptation theory is also referred to as the theory of survival of the fittest, which is an organism's ability to adapt to an environment and adjust with time. The scientist who came up with this theory is Charles Darwin, who conducted experiments in Galapagos Island in the 1830s. Before Darwin, there were many other scientists such as Aristotle, William Paley, Lamarck, and Buffon, who accepted the fact that species change with time but did not understand the underlying cause for this change or that adaptation was a continuous process which does not have a final form. Adaptation theory suggested that with habitat change there are three other changes that takes place. What are these changes? First is the habitat tracking. Organisms which used to live in the environment go in search of an environment like the habitat it used to live in. Or we can say this is when a species finds another similar environment to which it has inhabited before. Next is the extinction. When species are not able to adapt to the new environment or move out and find a new environment to live in, they eventually die out and become extinct. Or we can say when the species is unable to find such an environment, it dies or become extinct. Next is the genetic change. Genetic change is natural selection that allows the organism with slight mutations to survive better in an environment when compared to the other organisms in a given area. Or this occurs when organisms with slight genetic changes are better adapted to changed habitat with better access to resources and mating partners. Example, Darwin observed the turtles living in two islands. The turtles in one island ate from the lower ground due to which they had shorter legs and straight shells. When these turtles migrated to another island where the food resources were at a height, turtles with longer legs were able to eat and survive and reproduce. With time, their necks also grew longer and their cells became round, and these adaptations were passed on to generations for the turtles living in that island. Now, what causes adaptation? This is very important. Certain mutations are harmful to human beings, while certain mutations could be advantageous to the survival of an organism in the struggle for existence. This can be explained with example. If a bird is born with a long beak, and this helps it to capture food and therefore survive better. This bird is therefore able to survive better and breed more. This gene continues to be inherited generation after generation. Natural selection is the process in which individuals with survival advantage will survive in an environment and those with less advantageous traits will die due to the pressure from the environment. In an area, the resources are fixed or limited. There is competition among the species of that area to fight for the available resources. In a population, some individuals have the traits which could be structural or behavioral that makes them better at surviving and reproducing. In the struggle for existence, some individuals show variable variations that have a reproductive advantage and produce more offsprings than other species. Any unfavorable variation selects out against their presence, conferring a selective disadvantage on that organism. If we take another example to explain it, different species of the finches existed on the Galapagos Island. The variations among them was in their beak characteristics. Nature selected the most suitable beak against the less useful ones. Next is the types of adaptation. Here we will discuss the various types of adaptations in brief, and we will have a separate lecture to explain in detail about the different types of adaptations found in animals. First is the structural adaptation. If we talk about the structural adaptation, these involve the physical features of an organism that help them to survive in the environment, including the different types of terrestrial habitat. The physical changes are related to the changes in the physical environment. For example, camouflage, which is a protective coloration that helps an organism to blend in its environment. This protects them from predators and increases their chances of survival. Next is the physiological adaptation. Like structural adaptations, the physiological adaptations also involve physical changes in the species. However, physiological adaptations are not always appearance, and this type of adaptation can be either due to changes in the environment or due to the behavior of other species. For example, a fish living in water that suddenly becomes more acidic has to shift its body chemistry to adapt itself. Next is the protective adaptation. If we talk about the protective adaptation, these are the adaptations which protect the animals from their natural enemies, and these are effective only against a particular enemy and minimize the risk of death or injury from natural enemies. The animal may defend itself either by counterattacking or by hiding. Natural enemies hunt their prey by sight and smell. Therefore, the adaptations for protection may be either visual or non-visual, which we will be discussing in the next lecture. Next is the animal association adaptations. In this animal association adaptations, we can say animals of different groups and also of the same group are found living together exhibiting different degrees of association. These include socialism, commensal adaptations, symbiotic adaptations, parasitic adaptations. All these will be discussed in detail in the next chapter. Next is the importance of adaptation. Every organism has a natural habitat which is home to the organism. This is where the basic needs of the organisms like food, shelter, water and other needs are met. All organisms need to adapt to their habitats to be able to survive. And adaptation is the change to the structure or behavior of the organism which helps the organism survive better in the habitat. This means the organism will have to adapt to the climatic conditions, predators, and compete for the same resources with the other organisms living in that habitat. Adaptation is essential for the survival of living organisms. Animals which are unable to adapt to changing environmental changes die. These adaptations are a result of genetic changes, and the animals that survive pass on the mutated genes to their offsprings. This is known as natural selection. Animals live in an environment where there are several factors like the climate, the kinds of plants and other animals that may be predators or might compete with them for resources. The animals must adapt to all these factors to survive. Adaptations such as camouflage and coloration protect them from predators. DNA mutations help in the longer survival of animals in dangerous environments, and these traits of survival are passed on to future generations. These adaptations make it possible for a variety of creatures to thrive on planet Earth. Adaptation protects the animal from their predators. That's all in today's lecture. In the upcoming lecture, we will discuss in detail about the various types of adaptations in animals. Thanks a lot for paying the attention.